All right, we're here now on starting Module 2. We're going to talk about practice models, and in talking about the different practice models, we're going to look at a couple of things. One, we're going to look at what is our scope of limitation and how does that impact what our models and where we can practice. We're going to look at sites where we can practice. We're going to look at revenue opportunities within those sites, and then we're going to just take a brief look at sometimes why doesn't this work, because it should. So let's start with the basics. You're a nurse practitioner. What does that mean? That means you're a registered nurse, and what more importantly, it means you provide something physicians don't. You get to provide two things. You get to provide physician services, and you get to provide nursing services. Now, this is going to be important later to differentiate physician services, which is diagnostics, treating, therapy, things in that regard, where nursing services tend to be more nursing-related, activities on the floor, quality assurance, those activities. But we'll point out that a little bit more. Who gave you the legal authority to bill? If someone comes up to you and says, why do you get the bill? I don't understand that. Well, I'll tell you why. Medicare reimburses for physician services, not nursing services, but physician services, which includes services which would be provided by physicians. That means you provide physician services. Doctors hate hearing that, but it's how Medicare states it. So it's actually the legal representation. It's a nurse practitioner providing physician services, which means I provide physician services. I know I've said that many times, but it's an important aspect to understand when you start interpreting rules and regulations. Medicaid gave us the authority to bill, and each state has a little bit of their own statutes that relate to that. So that's who gave us the authority. Now, that's our federal-like environment. Let's look at state regulations. We know every state's different. We're all trying to get to the point where we can limit the limitations on the scope of practice. And so what is also important is to know, what does your individual state do? Here's an example of Alabama and California. We know there's independent practice states. We know there's, Arizona's got a great environment where there's no restrictions. So every state's a little bit different. So it's important to know that. How do you find out? Carolyn Bupert actually has a book that I reference all the time that lists what happens in each state, and then we just validate to make sure that that's still current. Other restrictions on scope of practice, so we've got federal, then we've got a state. Well, we have payer restrictions. Sometimes payers won't credential us. So does that mean we're not worthy of providing the services? Does that mean we can't provide the service? No, we just know that, for example, Cigna will not contract directly with us, and that we have to bill under some collaborating physician or in a special way. We also know that there's medical staff limitations where the hospital says, hey, you're not allowed to do this. And this is the one that irritates me the most, because we end up with nurse practitioners, some of you in this class, that work in a hospital environment. And because that hospital has rules and regulations about you're allowed to admit, you're not allowed to admit, these aren't services you're privileged to provide in our hospital, we tend to get into this pigeonhole of that means all nurse practitioners can't do this. No, that's just your hospital. So an example, I was at a hospital over in Virginia, and I said, no, nurse practitioners can admit patients. Oh, no, that's not allowed. That's just federally not allowed. No, you are allowed to admit patients. Now, your hospital doesn't let you? Okay, know that that's the restriction, so what am I going to do to combat that? That means we need to come together, and maybe all the nurse practitioners in the hospital rally together to go after the medical staff to say we need to change the bylaws of this hospital that we can admit or we can provide services that maybe be limited by the hospital. So don't get hung up that just because they limit you doesn't mean that your scope of practice, if you were to go to another state or another hospital, would be limited in that same fashion. Then we have a corporate limitation. This screams minute clinics, retail clinics, ready clinics. It's a corporate limitation. I own a retail clinic. I do not want you drawing blood. That is not something we provide in our clinic or in our retail environment. Does that mean you're not qualified to draw blood? If I say, hey, you can't do, you cannot treat in a limited service environment comorbid conditions. You are only allowed to see those patients in this environment. Those are all limitations corporations are setting against us because it's the scope of practice they want. Does that mean you personally are unable to do that in your profession and career? No, it's just in that setting you're not allowed to do that. So as we review that, you need to understand how to resolve situations. We all understand the state law piece. We have associations that we all pay money to that help us, lobby and get our way in the state capital environments. Payer restrictions, I personally battled this. In fact, we've been doing nurse practitioner billing and work since 1999, and we have consistently fought for provide the same service. Now, here's what's interesting. Everybody keeps telling us, oh, well, you get limited service, or you nurse practitioners always paid less than a doctor because their value is less than a doctor. If I ever hear a nurse practitioner say that, man, we're going to have a conversation, because I have in contracts for our nurse practitioner centers where we are paid equal reimbursement to that of the physician. So payer restrictions on compensation, those you can negotiate away. Medical staff limitations, those you could bylaw revised and update. Corporate limitations, if the corporate model or philosophy changes, but that's a whole different topic. But when they say, well, nurse practitioners can't do that, let's make sure we understand where we're talking and what our limitation is, okay? So in a quick review, nurse practitioners, I can perform evaluation and management, I can do consultations, I can discharge people from the hospital, I can admit people, I can assist in surgery, I can do procedures, I can do wound care, I can perform other services, I can put in chest tubes, I can perform CPR. You can do all of these things, and you know it. And guess what? Every one of those things I just said are all reimbursed services that put money in your pocket. So when we go look at the next section of the next video, keep in mind those are things you are able to do. So let's take a look and recap. Understand the scope of practice limitations, the impact of various practice models. We reviewed the hierarchy and the scope of practice limitations and the limits it has in the different place of service environments. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into this in this next section, but I wanted to get that across. Thank you.